Hello everybody and welcome back to Vehicles of War Thunder. So I noticed last time that since this latest revival of this series, I had not yet covered a German vehicle. So I decided, why don't we go ahead and cover a German tank, starting with the Panzer II. In-game, there are 4 or 5 versions of the Panzer II, depending on if you want to count the Twitch drop version or not. There's also quite a bit of info on this series of tanks, so this episode might be a bit on the longer side, though I'll try not to dwell too much on the unimportant details. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start talking about the design history of the Panzerkampfwagen II. In the mid-1930s, the Panzerkampfwagen I was the main combat vehicle for Nazi Germany. It weighed 5.5 tons and was armed with just 2 machine guns and a rotating turret. The Panzer I, however, was not going to be an adequate design for the future battlefield. This, combined with delays on the Panzer III and Panzer IV, required the development of a new stopgap tank that weighed about 10 tons with a 20mm autocannon. Krupp AG, Daimler-Benz, MAN, Henschel, Son AG were all contacted and submitted their designs to the Waffenamt, probably mispronounced that, in 1935. This would result in 10 prototypes being completed by late 1935, initially named LAS 100. Production would be approved the same year. The accepted design of the Panzer II was largely the same as the Panzer I, just enlarged and with a turret that was equipped with the new Rheinmetall KWK-30 L55 20mm autocannon. The autocannon was derived from the 2cm Flak 30 AA gun and was capable of a fire rate of 600 rounds per minute. The idea behind using this gun was to have good armor-piercing capabilities due to the high velocity and high fire rate, particularly at short range against most of the light and medium tanks of the time. A normal provision for the Panzer II was 180 rounds of armor-piercing and high explosive for the autocannon, and 2,250 rounds for the coaxial 7.92mm Rheinmetall Borsig Model 34 machine gun. The Panzer II was capable of elevating the gun by plus 20 degrees and negative 9.5 degrees. The first designs of the Panzer II had 14mm of homogeneous steel armor on the front with 10mm on the top and bottom. This was sufficient to protect against shrapnel and rifle caliber rounds, and while the Panzer II would not see action during the Spanish Civil War, lessons would still be learned and prove that this armor scheme was inadequate against many of the 37mm AT guns in use at the time, or the French 25mm and 47mm and Soviet 45mm towed anti-tank guns. Most of the series used the same engine, being the 6-cylinder Maybach HL62 TRM, developing 140 horsepower, coupled with a ZF transmission with 6 gears plus 1 reverse. The Panzer consisted of a 3-man crew of driver, commander/gunner, and loader/radio operator. This was progress over the Panzer I, but would still result in an overworked crew. The use of radio would provide an advantage to the Panzer II over foreign designs. The Panzer II had many different variants, the earliest of which are development and limited production runs, and are denoted using lowercase letters, with the A model being further subdivided by Ausführung A1, A2, and A3. Each of these subdivisions would have minor mechanical changes. 75 of this first production run would be made in total between May 1936 and February 1937. The next limited production run would be the Ausführung lowercase b, and would heavily rework the suspension and increase the deck armor for the hull and turret roof to 10 to 12mm. A total of 25 of this second production run would be completed between February and March 1937. The last limited production run would be the Ausführung C, and it would closely match the mass production configuration. At least 25 of this final limited production run would be made between March and July 1937. From this point on, all the variants will be using capital letters. The only difference between the last limited production run and the Ausführung capital A would be minor internal changes. The Ausführung B also had no major changes between it and the Ausführung A, and it only exists due to a delay in finalizing the design of the Panzer III for mass production, so more Panzer IIs were ordered, with a few minor changes, such as a vertical bullet deflector welded to the sides of the superstructure in front of the vision ports. The Ausführung C was ordered to keep factories busy until the Panzer III entered mass production. The only visible difference is a new type of improved vision port. A total of 1,113 of these 3 variants would be produced by Alket, Famo, Daimler-Benz, Henschel, MAN, MIAG, and Wegmann. Probably mispronounced the last one. Between March 1937 and April 1940. The Ausführung D and Ausführung E would overhaul the suspension, replacing the leaf spring suspension that was found to have a limited lifespan of 1,500 to 2,500 kilometers, with a new torsion bar suspension system. These models would be designed by Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nuremberg, aka MAN, or MAN, however you want to pronounce it. 7 of the Ausführung E were made, each with different wheels for use in trials. As for the Ausführung D, a new engine, the Maybach HL62 TRM, and a new 7-speed gearbox were used, allowing the tank to reach a top speed of 55 kilometers an hour. All the Ausführung Ds that survived the invasion of Poland and France were converted into 7.62 centimeter Pak 36R Marder IIs, following an order issued December 20th, 1941. Some were also converted into flamethrower tanks instead of Marder IIs. The flamethrowers were supplied with 320 liters of fuel and 4 tanks of compressed nitrogen. A total of 42 Ausführung Ds were built from October 1938 through March 1939. The official designation for the flamethrower version, for anyone curious, is the Panzerkampfwagen II F Ausführung A/B. The F here, however, should not be confused with the Ausführung F. In this case, F is short for Flamm or Flammpanzerwagen, which would roughly translate to flame or flamethrower tank, respectively. This variant is actually often referred to as the Flammpanzerwagen II or Flamingo. The Ausführung F was built with heavier frontal armor of 30mm for both the hull and the turret. Between March 1941 and July 1942, 509 were built, and this was the last major tank version of the Panzer II series. The next variant that saw production was the Ausführung L Lux. This was intended for use in reconnaissance missions. Its official designation of Panzerspa-Wagen II translates roughly to Armored Car II. It could reach a speed of 60 kilometers an hour with a range of 290 kilometers. It could accommodate a 4-man crew of commander, who also served as the gunner still, a driver, a dedicated loader, and a radio operator. 100 were built between September 1943 and January 1944, in addition to the conversion of 4 Ausführung Ms. The next variants are all prototype tanks. First up is the Ausführung G, which was authorized for development in the summer of 1938. The intent was to make a more mobile armored fighting vehicle to supplant its predecessors in the Panzer divisions. Initially, it was known as VK901. This variant was designed with the belief that speed was paramount, so the design stayed largely the same as the Ausführung D, with the exception that it would be equipped with a vertical stabilizer. The next prototypes would be the Ausführung H and Ausführung M. These would only reach the prototype phase and would be known as VK903. The armor would increase to 20mm on the sides and rear. The H may have been equipped with either the standard 2cm autocannon or a 2.8cm self-loading cannon that was calculated to be able to fire 15 to 20 rounds a minute and was intended to be able to penetrate 60mm of armor at 30 degrees from a range of 100 meters, when firing the 2.8cm Panzergranate 41 rounds. Next up is the Ausführung J, also known as VK1601, which would increase the armor of the hull and turret to 80 in the front and 80mm in the front and 50mm on the sides and rear of the turret. It was still equipped with the standard 2cm KWK autocannon. The last prototype that I will talk about, and pardon my German because this formal designation is a doozy, is a Panzerhauptfahrlafette 1C 5cm Pak 38 auf Panzerkampfwagen II Soderfahrgestell 901. Like I said, pardon my German because that's a doozy. It was only developed in prototype form and was one of 3 attempts to mount the 5cm Pak 38 gun on a Panzer II chassis. The 2 examples would be produced and pushed into frontline service, but mass production would not be undertaken in favor of heavier armed tanks. A few of the self-propelled artillery models that used the Panzer II chassis are the Wesp or Wasp, which was equipped with a 10.5 centimeter howitzer, of which 682 were built between 1942 and 1943. The other self-propelled artillery is the 15 centimeter SLG-33 Auf Fahrgestell Panzerkampfwagen II SF, which was equipped with a 15 centimeter field howitzer. Only 12 were completed by December 1941, and these were largely sent to the Afrika Korps. Now, as for how the tank actually performs in-game, starting off with the C and F, I don't have much to say about them because they aren't bad, and are actually pretty good at the BR that they sit at, though I think the C is a little bit better than the F just because of the slightly lower battle rating and the way up tiers work. I didn't bother taking out the 15 centimeter howitzer because I already know what I would say about it without even playing it. It's a glass cannon. It's capable of killing most, if not everything, at its battle rating without too much trouble, but you can be MG'd pretty damn easily, especially by 50 cals. I don't actually know off the top of my head if the frontal armor can be penetrated by calibers smaller than 50 cals, i.e., you know, the 7.62s and 8mm that a lot of the non-US countries use. But at the very least, if they get on your side, they can still machine gun you to death. So it really doesn't matter. No matter what happens, if you don't kill all the guys that are trying to kill you with like that first shot, you'll just get machine gunned to death. There's really nothing you can do about it. Like I said, it's a glass cannon. It really is. And of course, if you play that line of tank destroyers in the game, most of them tend to be sort of like that, where you'll just get machine gunned to death if you don't kill everything. Whether you'll get machine gunned by aircraft or something else doesn't really change it at all. Now, as for the 5 centimeter variant, it can be very good. However, because you are so lightly armored and small, and thus have a tightly packed crew, you can be killed with ease by many of the vehicles you will face. On the upside, though, you have a round that has decent penetration and should be capable of at least penning the sides of most of the vehicles you will face, with many of them even potentially being penned from the front. You also have at least some explosive filler. It's not a whole lot, but you have some. And some is better than what some nations have. Looking at you, Britain. Looking at you. You just love your solid shot rounds for some reason. However, your rounds penetration, particularly against sloped armor, does drop off quite a bit at range. So you're gonna want to use this thing as a flanker, generally speaking. Speaking of the explosive filler, though, going back to that, it's only 28.9 grams of TNT equivalent, which is actually the same as all the 5 centimeter Panzer IIIs. So it should generally be enough to kill the turret crew of most of the medium and light tanks you'll face, between the BRs of 1.3 and 3.3, if memory serves me correctly, because I included that spread in particular. The 5 centimeter Panzer II that has the 5 centimeter cannon sits at a BR of 2.3 in realistic battles. I don't know what it sits at in arcade and simulator because I don't play those game modes, generally speaking. But like I said, this actually should be enough explosive filler to ammo rack or fuel explosion many of the people you face, but you kind of have to get a direct hit on the ammo or fuel tanks to have a hope of that actually occurring. So like I said, when it comes to using this vehicle, because you're small, you're going to want to use this to your advantage and try to flank the enemy. And if the map is permitting, maybe hang out behind a bush or a tree. Doubly so if you actually bush up your tank. I sometimes bush up some tanks, a lot of tanks I don't, either just because I can't be bothered to try to find good places to put the bushes, or, you know, whatever the case may be. But that is actually going to be it for this episode of Vehicles of War Thunder. A quick reminder that I do have a Patreon, a Streamlabs, and a Discord. You can find links to all of those down in the description. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with the channel, any potential changes to my schedule and the like, I would highly recommend that you join the Discord. You don't have to be active, but if you want to know what's going on with the channel, I would highly recommend you join that because I don't generally post elsewhere. Sometimes I will, particularly for a big thing if I remember, but often I won't. As for the Patreon or Streamlabs, if you find yourself enjoying this series or any of the other series on the channel, those are the easiest ways to help support the channel so I can continue to bring you this type of content, especially when a vehicle that I want to cover may involve trying to get my hands on a premium or event vehicle. And particularly in the case of the event vehicles, they can be a little overpriced at times. As of when I'm recording this, I haven't really thought about who we'll cover next time, but I do notice that we have not covered a British tank during this series, or at least this revival. And we also kind of sort of skipped over the Italian reserve tanks and went straight for the P-40. So we're probably going to do one of those. I'm leaning a little bit more towards doing the British, just because, like I said, from what I can tell at least, we do not seem to have covered a British tank yet with this latest revival. And to be honest, I'm actually kind of leaning towards doing like a remake of the A13 video for a number of reasons. One, things have changed since I originally did that video, but then also I've sort of changed my format. Rather than splitting the A13 into the Mark I and the Mark II as separate videos, I'm gonna probably do them, well, I say probably, I will likely do them as, and that's just saying the same thing, I will do them as a single video, because they're actually very similar vehicles. When I covered the video back then, I didn't really go too much in depth in comparing the differences between the Mark I and the Mark II. They're actually like 90% the same. And we'll get into what few minor differences exist between those two when I do that video. But I don't know for certain if that'll be the next video or not. I'm probably going to end up doing the same thing in the case of the Panzer III, because I did a video just on the Panzer III E. I think it was the E, but it might have been the B. It was one of those like reserve Panzer IIIs. But either way, I'm probably going to do the same thing that I plan to do with the A13, where I'll just do a video on the Panzer III. That will probably be a decent length video because I'm sure there's a lot of information, a lot of variants in the Panzer III. But yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I did it that way back then. It was because I realized that was probably going to be a long-ass video if I did it just the Panzer III. But I'm thinking, you know what? I'm sure I can find a way to trim that down to a reasonable length. So, yeah, like I said, I will probably give the Panzer III the same treatment as the A13 at some point in the future, but that's not going to be the next video. Like I said, it'll be between a British tank and the Italian reserve tanks. But we'll see what I decide to do next. But until next time, a goodbye and farewell.
Fertig!